A terrible thing had happened. The man who many thought was the Messiah, who would free the nation from the Romans and set up his kingdom. Instead, he'd been taken at night by the religious leaders and handed over to the Romans. The Roman governor knew that he was not guilty of any crime, but he ordered his crucifixion because he was frightened of these men and the trouble they might cause him. We're talking about the suffering and death of the Lord Jesus Christ, of course. He died a terrible, painful death, and his body was then put in a tomb cut out of the rock. But on the third day, there was some going round saying they'd been to the tomb and his body wasn't there. Also that they'd seen some angels who said he was alive again. We'll now read Luke chapter 24, verses 13 to 35. Now behold, two of them were travelling that same day to a village called Emmaus, which was 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they talked together of all these things which had happened. So it was, while they conversed and reasoned, that Jesus himself drew near and went with them, that their eyes were restrained, so that they did not know him. And he said to them, "What kind of conversation is this that you have with one another as you walk and are sad?" Then the one whose name was Cleopas answered and said to him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem? And have you not known the things which happened there in these days?" And he said to them, "What things?" So they said to him, "The things concerning Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how the chief priests and our rulers delivered him to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we were hoping that it was he who was going to redeem Israel. Indeed, besides all this, today is the third day since these things happened. Yes, and certain women of our company who arrived at the tomb early astonished us. When they said they did not find his body, they came saying they'd also seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. And certain of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see." Then he said to them, "O foolish ones, and slow of heart to believe in all that the prophets have spoken. Ought not the Christ to have suffered these things and to enter into his glory?" And beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. Then they drew near to the village where they were going, and he indicated that he would have gone farther, but they constrained him, saying, "Abide with us, for it's toward evening, and the day is far spent." And he went in to stay with them. Now it came to pass, as he sat at the table with them, that he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they knew him, and he vanished from their sight. And they said to one another, "Did not our heart burn within us while he talked with us on the road, and while he opened the scriptures to us?" So they rose up that very hour and returned to Jerusalem, and found the 11 and those who were with them gathered together, saying, "The Lord is risen indeed, and has appeared to Simon." And they told about the things that had happened on the road, and how he was known to them in the breaking of bread. Cleopas and his companion, quite possibly his wife in fact, had been in Jerusalem with the other disciples, the Lord Jesus, when all this happened to their master. But it was getting to be late afternoon now. Home was about 7 or 8 miles away. That's about 12 kilometres. And they wanted to get back home. They were very sad, and much about what had happened mystified them. But they set off home. As they walked along discussing it all, a stranger joined them. They didn't realise it, but the stranger was the Lord Jesus himself, alive. He took an interest in their conversation and asked them what they were talking about. Cleopas wondered if this new companion of theirs was just a visitor to Jerusalem. Otherwise, he'd surely have known what it was all about. And Cleopas explained what they thought about Jesus, what had happened to him, and what they hoped he would do. So what did they think about Jesus? Well, their thoughts about him were that he was a prophet, doing and saying wonderful things, a prophet before God and all the people. What had happened to him? Well, they blamed the chief priests and rulers for his death. What had they hoped he would do? Well, they'd hoped he'd save Israel. But there was more. They reported that the women who went to the tomb early, they found there was no body there, but angels who said he was alive. And then some others went to check and found it was as the women had said, but they hadn't seen Jesus. Cleopas didn't know what it all meant. But it seems they were so discouraged that they weren't going to wait and see what happened next. They were going home. During his life, Jesus had said several times that he'd be delivered into the hands of sinful men, be crucified, and on the third day rise again. And it wasn't just the 12 apostles who heard him say this. The women who went to the tomb remembered that he'd said it. And he may have said it when Cleopas was there. But whether Cleopas heard him say this or not, a reading of the prophets in the Old Testament, in their scriptures, should have made it clear to them. So they tell their companion what had happened and what they'd hoped would happen. Then he talks to them. He starts by telling them that they were foolish because they were slow to believe all that the prophets had said. Read what the prophets wrote, and it becomes clear that God's Messiah, the Christ, had to suffer what Jesus had been through, and then to enter his glory. And he went through their scriptures, the Old Testament of our Bible, explaining what was said about himself. It must have been an amazing eye-opener for them. As it was evening, by the time they got home, they urged this stranger to come in and to stay with them. He came in. They put food before him, and he, having given thanks for the bread and broken it up, gave it to them. And they then saw who he was, and he vanished from their sight. The others must be told this amazing news. They dashed back to Jerusalem, even at that late hour, and had told the disciples what had happened. And they also heard that the Lord Jesus had appeared to Simon Peter. Here's something for us to think about. What prophecies, events, and teachings do you think that Jesus is likely to have pointed out to Cleopas and his companion from the Old Testament of the Bible, from their scriptures?